Welcome everyone to another observability clinic. Today's topic, a practical guide to JMX monitoring with Dynatrace. Simplified observability for your JMX metrics with Dynatrace extensions. And I got the JMX expert with me, James Kitson. Hi, James. How are you doing?
Hello, very good. How are you?
Very good. Hey, cool topic. We just a couple of weeks ago, we did a session on the Visual Studio extension to build extensions with Dynatrace made easy. And today, I think we will also see a little bit of this, but focusing on the JMX data source. And I think a lot of people are living in the Java world. And if I'm not mistaken, JMX is really coming from the Java world. And you're going to show us how to easier monitor JMX data sources with Dynatrace, right?
That is correct.
Perfect. Well, James, maybe one quick round of introduction, like what else do you do at Dynatrace?
Sure. So I've been with Dynatrace for around 8 years now. I did a lot of work consulting with customers and working with them. Then a few years ago, I moved over and I've been working on the extensions team full time. So a lot of what we do is building custom solutions, custom extensions for customers, but we also do a lot of work on most of the supported extensions that you would access and use from the hub.
Very cool. Well, James, let's jump into the topic. What have you prepared for us today?
Very good. Right. So what we'll be looking at is basically just JMX monitoring in general, and specifically in Dynatrace, how you're going to use it, interact with it, reference a little bit of the older framework, and primarily we'll be moving to the new 2.0 framework, details around that. So I'll show a little bit about just the details of that JMX data source in the 2.0 framework, if you're interacting and building a new extension from scratch. But a lot of our customers already have JMX extensions that they use in the 1.0 framework, and we're going to look at using the VS Code add-on to automatically convert those and make them available in the new framework and get all the benefit from that.
Nice.
Right. So a very just brief introduction or refresher for JMX, focusing on the pieces that would be relevant for what you'd be using in Dynatrace. Stands for Java Management Extensions. Not that kind of extension. So it's JMX extensions, whatever. You'll be using these for monitoring Java applications. So it's a Java specific. And basically what it exposes is at the code level, it has things like configuration, some monitoring data, sometimes some operations available in what are called management beans. And these MBeans are the primary thing that you'll be interested in when you're interacting with them through Dynatrace. Those are what will have like the monitoring data that you're trying to extract and pull into Dynatrace. Now there are a few things if you have done any non-Dynatrace JMX monitoring just to be aware of. And this will also affect things like troubleshooting down the line. As opposed to having like a separate process that is reaching out remotely to these MBeans and to the JMX level to collect the data, Dynatrace does this at the agent level. So by having the one agent on your host monitoring a Java process, if everything's set up properly, which we'll go through, you don't need to worry about having authentication set up or ports being opened or anything like that. We do that through the instrumentation of the code. And if you have any experience with any of the other extensions framework 2.0 data sources, there are a few things that are unique about the JMX data source. A lot of this lines up with if you have any experience with how they worked in the older framework, same idea. So there is no standalone process. So for example, if you're using like a SQL data source or a Prometheus data source, when behind the scenes, when you set that all up, there is like a separate process that runs and collects that and reports it. As opposed to that, like we said, this Dynatrace is monitoring it at the agent level. I didn't touch anything. Monitoring it at the agent level. So basically, you have the agent on there. We don't need any other process running to collect that. Related to that, you do not need to have the extensions execution controller or the ECC running on your host to be able to do this, since it's all done via the agent. And lastly, you do need to sign the extension when you upload it, like you would for any other type of extension, regardless of the data source. However, for these, you don't need to distribute the certificate to all of your different hosts. So that should sound familiar to anyone who has used the JMX extensions in the older framework. The only change is that you have to sign it when you do the initial upload, just so you know what you're putting in your environment. Beyond that, though, there should be no extra hurdles by moving over to the 2.0 framework.
Really cool. Thanks, James, also for giving the refresher on JMX and especially the specifics here on how Dynatrace JMX extension works. I think that's obviously super convenient with the one agent that we just take care of everything because we're already in that process. And so we don't have to deal with any of the authentication or any ports that need to be open. I mean, that's really convenient. Yeah, thank you.
Now, there are a few, as we said, it is a little bit different. So there are, just when you're setting this up and you're going through and making sure your environment is ready for this, there are a few things that you'll set up a little bit differently, or just to check for, basically. One of these important ones is that your Java process does need to be monitored using like the full process deep monitoring. It can be in the infrastructure mode, so it doesn't need to be using a full stack version mode of the agent, but it does need to be fully monitored. So if you see things like warnings that something needs to be restarted, or if you have gone in and turned off that process monitoring, JMX monitoring won't work. So you want to make sure that to check those if you aren't seeing data when you're expecting to see that. And then lastly, because this is still considered like an opt-in feature in the newer environments, if you have updated, the Java Metrics Extensions 2.0 JMX one agent feature, which I'll go through in the environment and I'll show that, that needs to be turned on in your environment. That can either be done at the environment level, or it can be done for individual process groups if you want to try it out before you turn it on everywhere. And just to note, if you are, mainly when you're like maybe testing this for the first time, when you turn this feature on, the first time you do that, if you have like a process already running, that needs to be restarted. After that, you don't need to do anything like that. My keyboard, my slides keep moving forward without me touching anything. Well, that's fine. All right.
You sure there's no cats running around, and maybe cats running?
Not that I'm aware of. No
okay.
visible cats. Yeah. All right. So how does that sound? Does that part make a little bit of sense?
Perfect. Thank you so much. And also, folks, if you're watching this and if you do have questions, right, then there's always the Dynatrace community where you can ask questions specific to the Dynatrace JMX extension and also other things in Dynatrace. So be reminded, just go to community.dynatrace.com, and then there's Q&A forums. And James, we should have also probably mentioned it. You are also doing a hot day, a hands-on training day at Perform.
That is correct. So I, as well as a few other people on our team, and one of our product managers, will be doing a hot clinic. Yeah.
Perfect. So if you're watching this prior to end of January of 2024, and you think you want to be in Vegas and you want to have some hands-on experience, hands-on training is available there.
Absolutely. Yeah, our team, the team I'm on, is one of the more active groups on the forums. So if you post anything, especially extensions, extensions topics, usually they'll get the answer pretty quickly. Okay. All right. So just a note, we'll be talking about building your own extension, but there are already a variety of JMX-based extensions on the hub. So if you go through, you'll find some of those. Like anything with any of the extensions, if you want to, once we have gone through and sort of shown you how they work, you can always go and download those, extract those, look at those for reference if you want to see how we did something like that. That's always available. Okay. So like I said, we'll be looking at building our own. And one of the big highlights of this is we will be using the VS Code add-on that was referenced in the previous observability clinic to make this a lot easier. So especially if you are if you have an existing 1.0 extension, you can basically do it once you have your environment set up in like less than a minute. It's very nice. But we'll same as before, though, we'll have all the benefits of that add-on. So things like making sure that your YAML files are written properly, the building and signing aspect and the deployment, plus a few other things that are JMX specific. Now, so as we will be talking about converting an existing extension, that'll be the primary sort of point of a lot of this. However, I do want to point out, and I'll cover in a few areas. There are a few new things that are possible in the 2.0 JMX extensions that were not possible in the previous framework. So that's definitely something. Even after you have converted your extension, you may want to go in and make a few other changes that make use of some of those new things. Primarily, I would say, is in the older framework. Anything that you ingested had to be a number, had to be able to become like a numeric value for it to show up. We are able to ingest things like statuses or states if they're written like in a string now. There's a few details to be aware of when you're doing that, as well as if you have some a bit more complex objects that are available, you can use accessors on those to get out values that previously you wouldn't have been able to access. And at the end of all this, we'll be sharing like links to a lot of the things that we'll be referring to. So don't worry about
exactly.
stuff.
It's a good reminder, folks. If you're watching this and you see links here, just check the description of the video, and we will put those links here, and also make sure that everything else we have, like the observability clinic we mentioned that we recorded just a little while ago, all the links are in the description of this video.
All right. So before I get into the actual writing, I just want to take a look at our environment real quick and sort of show you what to keep an eye out for in your environment when you're setting some of this up, to make sure that you're not going to be waiting for something that's not going to happen when you start testing. So just a brief little background of what I'll be working with. I do have Kafka running this in this environment. So that's like the application that I'll be using to basically just develop an extension against and test. So it does expose some MBeans that we'll be able to work with. So I'm on my host. So the first thing I'm going to check is go down, look at our process analysis, and I need to find our Kafka process. I see it here. The green check mark is a good sign. That means that deep monitoring is active and successful. If I saw a little warning icon here, it might need to be something I need to check on. So I'll come back to this in a little bit, but this is our process, and we'll be looking at adding some data to this. And now the second thing that we want to check is going to be the one agent feature, the 2.0 JMX feature. So if I want to turn it on at the process group level, I access any one of our processes and I access the settings. These settings are for the entire process group that this Kafka process is a part of. And now we see we have one agent features over here on the left. I click on this. I already have it turned on, and I have it available in the environment level wide as well. So if you basically, if you're coming in here and you were searching, you would type for JMX. 2.0 is the one that we're interested in. This other one up here, Java JMX metrics, that was for the other framework. So that was already on. And then if I go in and click on this environment button, we'll see in the settings, preferences, one agent features over here. I also have the option to control it at the environment level. So this is the one we're interested in. And just note, like a lot of stuff for the new features and all, we do have minimum versions and all that. Right. Okay. So now that we have that set up, everything looks green in Dynatrace, we can go in and start working on some of this. So let me pull up quick. I am going to build this from scratch though. So let me first go through the setup for the environment. As we noted, a lot of the details for the VS Code add-on was completed in the previous session. So what we will be doing is I'll sort of quickly run through this just as a brief refresher. But then once we get there, you will be able to, we'll continue with sort of a new aspect of this. All right. So I'm just going to actually delete this one here and add it again. All right. So if you haven't already installed it, extensions, you go ahead and search for Dynatrace. We should see the VS Code add-on, or the Dynatrace Extensions add-on right here. I already have that installed, and I have one environment connected, so I'm going to add a new one. So we take the URL for your environment, pop it in. We have an access token that I have already created. I will place that in here as well. And I'm just going to give it a name here. Set it as active. All right. Now I have that connected. So anything that I do from this point forward, when we're building the extension and pulling some things, is going to be using this environment. All right. Let me go ahead and open a new folder. I'm just going to create a simple one here. I already have some of this done. So now we have that active folder. All right. So the first thing we'll do is the same as we would do for any other type of extension. Going to initialize this workspace. So you make sure you have an open folder before you do this. We select our schema. You always want to make sure that you're using one that is not earlier than the environment you're in, for environment version or your one agents are in. So I'll select 275. I already have that downloaded. I already do have some certificates created because we will need to sign these extensions. And then we select the type. We'll come back to this part in a second, but you notice we have the JMX 1.0 conversion feature is available here. To start out with, though, I'm just going to just very briefly just sort of show if you were starting this from the beginning before we jump into the new one. So we have our environment or the workspace initialized. I can see it created all our files for me. So I'll leave this all at the top because I just want to show very briefly what the sort of section in the for JMX inside of one of these extension YAML files looks like. So
James,
remember, if I was,
could I ask you quickly to maybe zoom in just a little bit?
Absolutely.
On that, because
wrong way?
My eyes are getting a little tired. It's my age, so it's always good to see it in big letters. Thank you so much.
Of course, very good. All right. So if we were working with some of the other data sources, we start typing and it populates those. We're going to be using JMX. And notice it populates a lot of the fields. Mm-hmm. So these are the ones that you'll be interacting specifically, like these query ones. These are all specific to the Java, to the JMX data source. Mm-hmm. All right. So groups, subgroups, these types of things work the same as in any of the other data sources. So the query section, a lot of this is going to be coming, like if you'd used any of the 1.0 ones, it's more or less the same syntax. It's like a standard JMX query type syntax. So I'm just going to type a few in here. So one of the examples we'll be using is first we're typing in our domain. Notice we're doing some validation on here. So it'll tell me until I get a proper one that something is not quite right. All right, so I've typed that in. And now I can type in one more so that we have the domain, we have the type, and then we can enter in some of our key properties. Oops. All right, so that looks good. I'll make a few changes to this in a moment. So when we're interacting with these, this is basically telling us what MBean that we're going to be querying and pulling data from. We can also use things like wildcards. A lot of this is going to be, it is really like the same type of way you were interacting with them with the old framework and with any type of JMX. So if you have like a pattern or something you wanted to include, we can do that as well, things like that. Mm-hmm. So now that once we have the MBean that we're querying specified, we can pull out any of our metrics or dimensions that were available there. So if we were pulling out like a simple metric, let's say Kafka queue size was going to be our key.
Kafka.
Oh, Kafka. There we go. All right. And then when we're accessing this, we're going to say our value. And so any of the values of the MBean that we're pulling from are going to be attributes. So I type in the attribute prefix, and then I can put in our value there. Actually, these are all value. There we go. All right. So at the simplest level, this is sort of how you'll be pulling information from these. And this part is virtually identical to how you would previously work with this. Now, if I want to include some dimensions on here, for example, for just 1 second there. So since I'm wildcarding the name here, that means that any MBeans that have this type in this domain will be included. but they can have different names. So if you want to make that visible, put dimensions, you can put the name, oops. And then for the value, since these things that are at the top here, these are going to be our properties. So instead of using attribute, we'll use property. And this basically says, okay, we're going to get anything that has this type with any name. And then if the name for these, then we'll take out the property, the name property, and make that dimension on the metrics that we're reporting. Mm-hmm. And then just going a little bit further, just to see sort of what this will look like. If we also, I don't have an example of this sort of to look at here, but if I wanted to pull something from an accessor, say Kafka accessor example, we have our value, and then we'll actually go in one level down. Here's where we'll put in our name, what we're pulling from, oops. And then we'll put accessor in here. And this would be something like a method on this object to pull out from there.
Now, this is obviously very, very, for people that know JMX and have dealt with accessing JMX, this will be very straightforward and just the way you're accessing basically objects in or values in Java objects, right? And right. The MBeans, yeah.
And in our the documentation for this JMX data source, which I'm sure we'll link, there are also a lot of examples for using some of these sort of more advanced features to pull that.
Yeah, perfect.
And then one last thing here, just I'll sort of make this up on the fly. So if we had an MBean that had like a status like I was talking about, and we wanted to report that, the way that we would do that is, so I'll just change this to say, instead of name, we're having a status. Let me just change this down here to correspond to that. All right. So the way that we'll typically report state values or anything like that within Dynatrace via extensions, this is typical and standard across virtually all extensions that we're using, is instead of reporting an actual number that we're pulling from this attribute or anything like that, what we'll do is in our value, we put this something like this. So this const one is sort of saying, we're always going to be reporting the number 1 for this metric. And then you'll be using the dimension for the status to know what the current status is. So the one value is always going to be coming in for this metric. But when you're interacting with it with Dynatrace, you'll only see one status active at a time. And you can use that in dashboards and alert configurations to alert if status is in a state you don't want it to be in, or if it's not in a state that it should be in. Right. Very good. All right, so that's a little look at if you were to write some of this yourself, and if you have some experience with JMX, you might want to go that way. For a lot of our customers, though, a lot of people, especially because it was so easy to build them and roll them out in Dynatrace already, you probably already have some 1.0 JMX extensions available to work with. So we'll go ahead and now take a look at just doing it the sort of the quicker, easier way to convert one of those. Let me open up a new folder. We'll start a don't get too confused by my similarly named files. There we go. Now I need to save that. All right. So I already do have an extension in my environment that I had prepared for this. So what we'll be using is taking that 1.0 extension and updating it, converting it to be in the new framework. And then, like we said, it is going to be based on Kafka. So I could download the extension from my environment. One of the things that is a little bit easier, though, is we can actually pull the extension from your environment that you're connected to, sort of as we're doing this process, just to make that even a bit easier. So we'll start out with, we'll use our commands, our Dynatrace add-on commands to initialize a new workspace, just like we did before. And I don't know if I mentioned it, but you can use like F1 or Control-Shift-P to open up these commands at the top. And I'll be initializing a new workspace, just like before. Click that, already downloaded, use existing, great. Now, instead of building one from scratch, I'm going to select this JMX 1.0 conversion option. So here we have the option, if you have your extension, your 1.0 extension available locally, you can select locally. It'll open up an Explorer. You can go and find it, and it'll do it from there. We also have the option, since we are connected to the environment, which where this extension 1.0 extension is located, I can just use this option to pull it remotely. Okay. I have this available. I just select it. It'll ask me if I want to show some of this data on the host screen as opposed to just on the process screen, and I do. So I'm going to say yes. All right. And just like that, we have a big file of YAML that we didn't have to create manually. And I'll go through this in more detail in a second. But the first thing I want to do is build this and deploy it, activate it, so that after we've come through and looked at this, we can go back and see some of the data that it generated. All right. So it's already ready. Maybe the one thing I'll do, set my name here. I'm going to, again, Control-Shift-P or F1, Dynatrace Extensions build. Built, upload, activate yes. Now I can use this open button to just take me directly to the newly created extension screen. I can use that. I'll jump over there in a minute. All right. So now we already have this extension available for us right away. It's basically ready. We already checked all our requirements to make sure that this would work. So I can add our monitoring configuration. And as I'm looking at this, this is another area that is a nice addition or change from the 1.0 framework. If you interacted with JMX extensions and the 1.0 framework, you could go in through like the host and turn it on for that host, or you could turn it on environment-wide. But we get all the filtering controls that we get from the 2.0 framework that we can use to have more control of where this is running. Right. And this will only, as if it's not clear already, JMX, it'll only be a local activation. You won't be doing anything from active gates. So I can either select one host individually, we can use any host groups, management zones, or set it to be enabled environment-wide. And then on additional screens, if I wanted to, we could use things like tags to further filter it down, just to give us more control over where this is running. I'll go ahead and I will click on just this host I have it running on right now. I don't need to add any additional configuration. You can use things like variables if you wanted to make some of those filters that if you're setting your own filters, make them dynamic so that they can be changed during the configuration. We don't have any of that, so I can just say next step, give it a name, activate, and then this will take a few minutes as it's being deployed out to those hosts, start implementing the process. Since I already have made sure that the JMX 2.0 extension one agent feature is running, I don't need to do any restarts of those processes or anything for that to start being collected.
It's really powerful. And then, James, as we're waiting for this, just one quick question. So people that have the 1.0 extension or extensions based on the 1.0 framework, the benefit of moving over to 2.0 is not only what you just showed us with, the easier management, but I think that the big benefit is also that you can then define where and how this data should be shown and displayed, right? I mean, that's the big benefit of extensions 2.0. You can really control what Dynatrace should do with this data. You can basically define your domain knowledge and how it's displayed, whether you want to have some alerts like what we saw last week when we talked about extensions 2.0 and how to create them. It's just so powerful what you can do now with extensions. And yeah.
Absolutely. And just taking like the visualization as an example, in the 1.0 framework, you could have like, so you'd have to go into your process group instance, and you could you have some key metrics available at the top. Then you could click in and view a few additional charts. With this, we can add the data that's being collected from these JMX extensions directly to the pages that Dynatrace is already displaying. So you can group it, and it looks and feels as if this was something that is already being collected and you're interacting with as part of Dynatrace, as opposed to just something that was bolted on the side. All right. So, while we are waiting for that to sort of roll out, and we'll take a look at that in a second, I just want to sort of walk through a few of these sections. So let's see here. First, we have our JMX section. This should look similar, if not quite a bit bigger or larger than the sort of simple example I did before. But all these things are going to be the same here. Make sure we have our type set for these. If you have a number that is going up and down, you want to set it to a gauge. If you have a number that is constantly going up, you'll set it to a counter. I'll take a look at some of those. But other than that, this should look very similar to what we looked at. All right. So if I scroll down here to line 67, okay. Here we have an example of one where we have a wildcard within here for some of these, and then we're actually reporting the process request value as a dimension on this. We have some out here where we have, let's see, a counter. So this is an example of this metric here. This is going to be something that is always going up when it's being reported through JMX. So if we were to set this as a gauge, we would see the number going up constantly. By setting it to a count, we have the number, basically the change between the different intervals, monitoring intervals reported. So if this is, so we basically see the change, that's the important part. I don't remember if this was mentioned on the previous call as well, but for these counter type metrics, you're always going to have them prefixed or appended with a count at the end. And if you don't do it, oftentimes they'll do that for you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was mentioned, but thanks for the reminder. Yeah.
Very good. Okay. And one thing you'll note, and I'll walk through this, when you have converted your JMX extension from 1.0, you don't need to leave this as is. You can go in and modify it, make changes to it to customize either the data that's being collected, or if you want to change the visualization. The idea here is to give you like a very, very good start, and what it will be is at least as good as what you were using previously, but you can always improve that further. So now we have our screen section. The screen section is probably the most complicated one if you were trying to write this for the first time by yourself. This is what lets all of the different views and charts and Dynatrace show up and look nice, and like we said, as if it was something that is already sort of being collected and reported in Dynatrace. So we'll walk through this in a second once we have a chance to look at the data and how it's being reported for us already. But this is all generated based off of that plugin.json, the 1.0 extension file that you basically used it off of. So if in your 1.0 extension, you had defined different charts and views, this looks at those and translate them to be able to display them in basically the same way that you would have been used to. And then lastly, another one of those sort of like tedious, time-consuming things, even after you have your metrics reported, it is also going to be parsing that old extension to make sure that the units are set properly. It's going to make sure that things like a lot of the metadata is set, as well as the display name, so that you're not interacting with just like an ugly key. You're actually seeing the same display name, same thing that you're used to already from your older extension. So if you can imagine, if you were trying to write this from scratch, or even if you were trying to write this over from an existing 1.0 framework, sort of more or less manually, that would take quite a bit of time. I think I did that, and once I had the environment set up, and it was just however long it took to run the command. Right.
Now we want to see it in action.
Oh, absolutely. All right. So if I refresh this now, all right, so now we see our state is okay. So we have that running. Now, I think I'm in a different window here. Let me jump over to this one, and let me get back to my, first I'll get back to the host that this is running on, so we can see a change. All right. So this looks all the same, but if we look in the far right down here, Let me zoom in a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Down here, we have this section that was added to the host screen because it asked us if we want to do that. Right. Now we have some of our Kafka metrics available at the host level. So even this by itself is something that you wouldn't have been able to do in the 1.0 plugin extensions. So that's one part there. And now I know I have my Kafka process. I can just click on it to get to it directly from here. Right. Now to see the metrics and the new charts that we're defining for a 2.0 extension for like the unified analysis screen for this, I'm going to click on these three dots and we get to this button here, metrics and logs analysis. So this is all default data, but if I look on the right, we can see all of these different charts that were defined for that are using the data we're collecting, and they're all sort of defined for us, broken down. Again, similar to how it was organized in the older 1.0 extension. All right.
Very sweet. So that's the unified analysis screen now for the process view. That's awesome.
Right.
Yeah. Wow. What's also nice, maybe James, before you go on this, in all of the unified analysis screens, I know obviously you don't have a whole lot of interesting data here because your Kafka cluster is probably not that heavy under load. But if I look at the, let's say the controllers, that metric that you have there in the Kafka cluster section, right? You can zoom in, or like you can select that range. For instance, the range from 840 to something. And if you are making it big enough, you can also click on the analyze thing, right? I mean, that's the beauty of this. You can also then use the Davis on demand analysis, which is pretty cool. Making it big enough. I think you need a little bit more data, but then the analyze button becomes available, and then Davis will walk through all of the metrics that we're collecting on that instance, and it will tell you which other metrics are the most probable cause of the behavior of that. So for instance, if the, I don't know, the Kafka connect byte rate goes up, what is it? Is the root cause the number of requests are coming in, or the size of the messages and things like that? So it's really, that's why this extension, the extension 2.0 is so great, because it really gives you all the metrics in the unified analysis screens. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Right. So one other thing we can look at, and this might be a bit of a refresher from some of what we looked at previously, is like I said, once this has been created, you're free to modify this, customize it to make it even better. So let me go ahead here. If we remember, one of the options that we have is this fast in the development mode in the VS Code add-on for this extension I'm working on. So if I turn this on, now what I can do is make some changes to things like the screens and have it updated very quickly and see the results of those. So if we look at over here, we have this Kafka broker section. And if I say, okay, this looks okay, the way it was converted and the way it's displayed is pretty nice. What I can do is go in to here, and I find, so this process, this injection into the process group instance UA page is defined here in this card for this chart group Kafka broker. So if I scroll down and I find this underneath the chart cards, have it right there at the top. So if I go in and I say I want to modify this, I save it. What it's done, if you notice on the right, is it went through and it just automatically updated a new version, deployed it. And so it's not going to update it like on the actual JMX that's running, but it is going to update the configuration for the UA screen that is available in the UI. So if I go over to here and I look at this now, we can see on the right here that we have my new name already applied. So as you're working on this, customizing things, it's very quick. Another example of here, if I say, okay, I have this chart for my byte rate. It looks okay. Maybe I want to customize this a little bit. Maybe I want to have this displaying a different color. Green there. and maybe I want it to be a different type. Maybe I want it to be a bar chart for some reason, column. Save it. Again, it increments a version for me, uploads it, and then let's see if this is, see how fast it is. There we go. So now I have the colors, I changed it so it's using green for this, and now I have that one metric I'm reporting. Nothing really interesting to see there, but if you can see from the little icon down there, we're using a column chart instead.
Yeah, yeah.
All right.
A great way to experiment and do rapid development. Yeah, that's really nice.
All right, so I'd say that's the bulk of what we're going to look at. Do you have any questions, anything you want to look at?
No, I think for me, maybe just to recap, that on the one side, you can create your own extensions from scratch very easily. Obviously, you should be familiar with JMX. That will help. I know there's also tools that will help you get to these queries. I guess like JConsole and other tools are there to easier, find all of the queries. But then what's also really great is that you can easily convert your 1.0 extensions into 2.0 extensions. The reason why you want to do this, easier configuration, better support in the UI screens, what you just see here, and just more capabilities in the metric definition itself. No, it's awesome. There's a lot of extensions already available on the hub, so that means you don't need to build everything from scratch. Right. So check out what's out there, but there will be certain data sources or certain JMX metrics where maybe we don't yet have an out-of-the-box extension, so you can just build it, especially your custom JMX metrics that you have. Yeah,
absolutely,
it's really nice. Yeah, no, I'm really happy that we that you showed us this and how easy it is. And then I don't know, to wrap it up, I guess you got a couple of additional links to share, or maybe something what's coming up in the future. Is there anything else?
So I will, and this will all be shared at the end. But yeah, we do have a lot, and this will all be included, but we do have a lot of useful documentation for these, as well as I would always recommend, if you haven't, watching that previous observability clinic, because that goes into, if some of the initial setup for the environment, or you're asking questions about like what is actually needed for it to access the environment, what do I need to add to the token, it goes into a lot more detail on that. So I'd recommend checking that out.
Perfect. Good. James, thank you so much for doing this. Again, a reminder for people that contemplate to go to Vegas for Perform 2024. There's going to be a hot day session, a hands-on training day session with James and his team to get some more hands-on experience in building your own extensions, and basically the stuff that you've shown today in a more deep dive and hands-on fashion. Nice. James, anything else from you?
Nope, that's all for me. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here, and looking forward to having you back, because I know, as you mentioned, you're building a lot of extensions. You're also building a lot of the framework around the extensions. Glad to have you back in the future for more topics.
Very good. Thank you.
Bye-bye.